Hello. So today let's chat about kale and the different varieties. So kale has a lot of uses and it can taste good or bad depending on matching the use for the variety. So we're going to spend a little time talking about the different varieties and which each variety is good for. And that's important because if you're trying to use kale in your salad and you have a bitter one that's maybe better for smoothies or soups, you're going to think kale is disgusting, which is how I used to think of it, a punishment food. But as I grew, got older, I realized it's a superfood and it's very, very important to eat just for the high antioxidants and nutrient content it has. So it's not a punishment food, it's a superfood, and we need to figure out which varieties go with how we want to eat it so it doesn't taste like a punishment. All right. So there are 5 varieties that we're going to go over in this one: curly kale, Lacinato, red Russian, Siberian, and winter boar. All of them have their pros, their cons, and where they fit in your garden. So curly kale is first. This is probably the most common, and there are different varieties within curly kale, making it even more confusing, but we're always going to refer to it to the parent variety and understand that there are different sub-varieties within that. So curly kale, it thrives in cold temperatures, which all kale does. Kale actually gets sweeter after it frosts because the plant pulls sugar into the leaves to help make it so it has a lower freezing point. So sugar makes things freeze slower, and therefore the plant pulls the sugar out of the roots to the leaves to make sure that the leaves don't freeze once it starts frosting. So that's how kale is one of those vegetables that tastes worse in the summer and tastes better in the fall and early spring if you can get a harvest early spring. Curly kale also has pretty good bolt resistance, so that's when in the summer it just wants to go to seed right away and you don't get as much crop. So curly kale has a couple benefits there, but its best uses are for stews and soups or sauteing. It does not have the best flavor to go right into a salad. You certainly can. It's just not the best. Um, we'll talk about pests and disease notes, but just recognize almost all kale is susceptible to cabbage worms until you get into our hybrid varieties, and then they start using some modified genetics to make sure that they're a little bit more pest resistant. The next variety, not curly, is Lacinato. It is very good for kale chips. So you can see it's got the nice straight lines. It's not very curly. It's easy to cut, easy to devein. Devein, is that what you call it? Anyways, taking the center out of it. It's my favorite for kale chips, and kale chips are probably my favorite way to eat kale. This one variety does best in early spring or even the fall. It does not, it bolts kind of easily if the temperature rises in the spring. It also doesn't do the best in super cold temperatures, so you're going to want to plant it earlier in the fall so you can make sure you're harvesting before temperatures get too cold. This one is worse with aphids, so plant some niastrums or some other trap flowers that kind of call aphids to them if you're planting it around them. Marigolds work well too. The next variety is red Russian. If you're trying to grow something for aesthetic appeal, go with red Russian. Red Russian's is the prettiest. But again, a garden's not always about being pretty, it's about functionality. So if you're not going to eat the red Russian, then don't bother growing it. But if you want to eat it and for it to look good, red Russian's the way to go. And actually, red Russian is the best for salads. Works well for green juices as well, but it does have a sweeter taste, and it is one of the best raw. These also attract aphids quite badly. Siberian kale, this is the coldest, hardiest, so you can plant this later in the fall and potentially harvest all winter long. It is best for smoothies or getting cooked, freezing for later. Not the best for salads. It can have a little bit of a bitter taste, but it gets sweet after a frost as well. It is one of the best in terms of pests. It doesn't really have a lot of pressure from aphids or cabbage worms just because of the makeup of its leaf. So if pests are a big problem in your garden and you don't want to take some of the other steps to keep them in check, maybe try growing Siberian kale. Some of the newer hybrid varieties, we're going to talk about winter boar. That's what's pictured there. But there's also the rainbow, Lacinato, star boar, and dazzling blue. They're good, and a lot of them have better resistance in terms of the extremes that can make kale a frustrating plant to grow. So you can get ones that tolerate the cold better if that's where you are. You can get ones that don't bolt as easy, which could be beneficial in hotter climates or if you want to eat kale all summer long. And these ones, what you're going to use them for depends on which hybrid you're going to get, but they do make for better salad kales. And most hybrids have improved pest resistance. They can be modified. And I know genetically modified is a little bit of a touchy subject here, but just remember sweet corn is a genetically modified product. So just because we have selectively bred something to modify its genetics does not mean it's bad for you. It's not the same as a pesticide or a fungicide or an herbicide, chemicals that are truly bad for you and have known adverse effects and chronic conditions that they cause people. Breeding a crop to select for the traits you want is far more natural, but it's still considered genetically modified. So just don't necessarily believe every buzzword you hear. Genetically modified does not mean it is bad. In fact, I would argue that a lot of genetically modified crops can be genetically modified for better nutrient profiles and such, and thus actually be healthier for you. So if you're interested in more information, I want to dig a little bit deeper than this quick video tutorial I gave. The entire post has some comparison charts that show you which is best for where. It gives a few more updates on when to plant the right ones, some tools that will help you. So kale likes to go in the ground at 45 degrees. So you can get a handy soil thermometer to help you with that. Or you can even start it indoors. That's really good, especially for the ones that like cold temperatures. You can get the Siberian and the curly, you can plant them inside and get them actually in the ground and in the garden in March, and thus be eating kale by April, end of April, before it really even starts to get warm. I've also got a few infographics that will show you which types of kale work best for depending on what you want to eat. And then there's some tools on pest prevention as well, if something you're struggling with. And it's got a pretty comprehensive planting timeline overview, so you know exactly when to plant for multiple harvests, when to avoid for bolting. Just really, really useful information. So I hope you learned something. I hope your kale harvest does great. You should be getting it in the ground for the fall if you're watching this video shortly after I post it, which is end of August. So get ready for a winter harvest that's sweeter than your spring one was. Take care, everyone.